The former US President Donald Trump is due to appear before a court in Washington, D.C. He faces his most serious charges to date: conspiracy to defraud the US, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of an official proceeding, and conspiracy against the rights of citizens. What does all that mean? In plain English, trying to overturn the 2020 US presidential election result, which he lost, as you know, to Joe Biden, culminating then in the attempted insurrection on January the 6th in 2021. Now, Donald Trump's own former Vice President, Mike Pence, has been pretty damning about the Donald and his lawyer's conduct.
I want the American people to know that I had no right to overturn the election. And then on that day, President Trump asked me to put him over the Constitution. But I chose the Constitution, and I always will. I mean, I really do believe that anyone who puts themselves over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. The president specifically asked me, and his gaggle of crackpot lawyers asked me to literally reject votes, which would have resulted in the issue being turned over to the House of Representatives, and literally chaos would have ensued.
Chaos. What will it be like shortly? We can see the courthouse there, live pictures, as I promised. As anything happens and changes, we'll let you know. This isn't, though, of course, the first time this year even that Donald Trump has ended up before the courts. Earlier, he appeared before a court in New York. It was the 4th of April. The Secret Service escorted the 45th President of the United States from Trump Tower to the Manhattan District Courthouse at 1:30 New York time. Well, he defied expectations. He didn't speak to the press, and when he arrived, he was booked. His fingerprints were taken, but not his mugshot. Well, at this time, Trump and his counsel also received the details of the indictment. Then a few hours later, 2:40 p.m, the first photographs of Trump in court were released. He then entered the courtroom for his arraignment, appearing before the judge who read out the charges. About 10 minutes later, we then heard he'd pled not guilty to all 34 counts. Well, about 2 hours after his arrival, he left the courthouse again, choosing not to make a statement until he delivered a speech to supporters that evening at his estate in Mar-a-Lago. Now, I promise we keep you up to date. Rosanna Lockwood has got a 2-hour special giving you all the latest developments after this show, so stick with us here on TalkTV. Before that, though, and joining me to discuss are our fantastic panel, Managing Editor of Inside Sources, Michael Graham, the former chair of the Nevada GOP, Amy Tarkanian, and former Republican Congressman, John LeBoutillier. Now, let's start with you, Michael. I think this is going to be the most difficult question that we start with, but just explain in real basic terms what we can expect, what's actually going to happen in the next few hours.
Well, really nothing. I mean, that's what's fascinating about being processed as a, when you're charged with a felony. And in particular with President Trump, the decisions were made. They're not going to take a mugshot. At least that was the announcement a couple of hours ago. The only thing they're going to do is digital fingerprints. So they're not going to have the ink stained fingers that we've come to see. There'll be no great mugshot to see. I think Donald Trump personally would give a great mugshot, but we're not going to get it. And then politically, what's going to happen is really nothing. I thought it was interesting. You described these as the most serious charges. That is not the feeling that I'm getting from inside sources readers who are Trump supporters. They are dismissing these as the least significant for two reasons. One is been there, done that. It's not as exciting as it was last time. And two, the charges revolve around Trump saying things that are untrue. Trump has been saying things that are untrue since Mama, I Want a Baba when he was 18 months old. I don't know that that's going to have a major impact on his base of support.
And Michael, can you explain, from what we've heard from Trump and his lawyers and what's happened in previous cases, what you think the basis of his defense will be?
Well, that he honestly believes that the 2020 election was stolen. And so all of the things he said about it, and it's fascinating, if you read the indictment, the words Trump said, Trump lied, Trump pushed, Trump urged, but there's very little, and then Trump, broke into the store or hit somebody on the head. And so he was spreading what they're describing as a conspiracy. But the question that the Trump defense is going to raise is it a conspiracy if you honestly believe it's true? And so there are very smart people, much smarter than me, like Andy McCarthy, who's a former federal prosecutor and writes for the conservative magazine National Review, who says, look, I don't like Trump. I've already urged him not to run again. This is not a strong case because it's about talking, not doing.
Listening to that is Amy. Amy, do you feel proud of the party on a day like today?
No, absolutely not. And I find it appalling and embarrassing. And it's very sad I think, it's not just about his rhetoric. I think that I would absolutely hope that in this findings that the coordination actually took place, because I will tell you, here in the state of Nevada, we actually suffered by having to deal with state party leadership participate in the fake electors scheme. And what that did to our democracy, I think, was a terrible thing in my mind, because it put in other people's minds that what President Trump was saying about there being systemic fraud and the fact that, rules needed to be adjusted, votes needed to be found, I think was incredibly damaging, not just to our democracy, but to the Republican Party as a whole.
Yeah.
And so we had to, in our last legislative session, we even had to pass as a felony to make it against the law to harass poll workers and election workers, because people were being told all of these lies and they were lashing out. And this is just completely unacceptable, and it starts from the top.
Yeah, Amy, there's been a poll just released by Reuters that says 45% of Republicans wouldn't vote for Trump if he was convicted of a felony. What's been really interesting throughout all of these charges is, this will be the third time he'll be indicted. He seems to actually garner support rather than people saying, we just can't stand by this. Does that poll suggest maybe that if this does get to the point where he's found guilty, that support basis changes, Amy?
It doesn't seem to be. It seems to be strengthening with each indictment. And the fact that he even put on Truth Social something along the lines of, I'm going to jail for you. So he's now done such an excellent job on creating this scenario of victimhood. And his famous line of, they're not coming after me, they're coming after you. They just have to come through me. He's rallied his base. He's angered, stirred the pot with frustration. So now everyone thinks that every time there's a new indictment, it is a witch hunt. And those are his words, and people repeat them.
Yeah. Let's look at that statement in full. He says, I'm now going to Washington, D.C. to be arrested for having challenged a corrupt, rigged and stolen election. It is a great honor because I'm being arrested for you. And then again, those words he always says, make America great again. John, it gives us an insight into what's in his mind right now.
Well, what's in his mind right now is to stay out of jail. And Donald Trump cares about one American. It's himself. That's what he cares about. He's not getting arrested for anybody else. He's getting arrested because this guy has been, for his entire adult life, a walking crime spree. And he's gotten away with it because he's well connected, because he paid people to support him. He paid the district attorney in Manhattan for years. He paid him. He donated huge amounts of money to the guy's charity and to his campaigns. And Trump has skirted and skated the law for decades. It's finally catching up with him. And, I love Michael Graham. I was so happy to hear that I was going to be on with Michael. And I am not picking a fight with him. I love him. But when he says his supporters don't think this is a big deal, it's the least serious of the charges. No offense, Michael, but who cares what they think? What counts are the 23 grand jurors in Washington and the 12 pettit jurors that he will face. And I can tell you, Donald Trump, scared to death of that trial, whenever it comes to face that jury with a judge who is a woman of color, born in Kingston, Jamaica, who's a hard-ass sentencer of January 6th convictees. And Donald Trump is scared today of that trial.
Well, John, we're looking again in that poll from Reuters. 52% of Republicans wouldn't vote for Trump if he was serving time in prison. So this could send huge repercussions through the party.
Yeah, I think, what are we in? August of 2023. It's a long way to November of 2024. No one knows what this will look like and what it'll feel like by then, whether he will have been convicted of anything. He's not convicted yet. He's an innocent man legally, obviously. But I don't think any of that's going to matter. I think the fact that what's happened is, and we've watched it, No one else is in the race anymore. This is the nomination of the GOP for a third time in a row to Donald Trump. He is the nominee no matter what happens. And all we're going to talk about between now and November 2024 is one thing: Donald Trump, the next upcoming trial, the sentencing, the witness, the judge, the blah, 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 blah. We're going to talk about him constantly. And guess who is the happiest man in America because of this? Joe Biden. Because when you run against someone, if the campaign is about the other guy loses. If the campaign's all about you, you probably lose. And Joe Biden's going to sit around for the next year and a half. He doesn't have to do a thing. He watches Donald Trump ruin himself and ruin the Republican Party.
Well, we've got very clearly Donald Trump's perspective on Biden. He's tweeted today saying Biden and his family steal millions and millions of dollars. We can actually see right now Donald Trump en route there. We've got live pictures of the courthouse as well, so when he arrives, but that's obviously him in transit to come to court. While we watch those pictures, let's hear what he said about the Biden, saying, Biden and his family steal millions and millions of dollars, including bribes from foreign countries. I'm headed to DC to be arrested for protesting a crooked election, unfair venue, unfair judge. We're a nation in decline. Let's talk about the venue, Michael, because previously when Donald Trump has been arraigned, he's been in a place which would normally be more his heartland, not so here in Washington. How might that sort of shift the dynamic?
Well, you go to a place where you're more likely to find someone who's suffered a case of Ebola than voted for Donald Trump. I mean, it's definitely hard. As a person who's lived in the District of Columbia, it's very hard to find Republicans in D.C., which is probably going to have an impact on the rolling out of this trial. And one of the things that, first of all, I disagree with John on one thing. The happiest person that everyone's talking about Donald Trump is Donald Trump, even though it's self-destructive. Trump loves the fact that he's the center. He doesn't care. But I would be willing to bet a modest amount of money, $74. I don't know what that is in your weird European monopoly money, but that Donald Trump does not get tried by anyone before this election, that they will delay and delay and delay. The courts just have a tradition of trying to stay out of politics. Now, it could be the case that there's so many courts, and without a doubt, the court in D.C. is openly partisan. They're not going to do Trump any favors, but every ruling by that court's going to be overseen by another court. Eventually it will be the Supreme Court. And it's hard to imagine you get the first ever criminal trial of a former president who's the front runner for his party's nomination and not have the Supreme Court get involved at some point. And the
Michael,
Supreme Court's fear is going to be setting rules for the long term.
Can you just explain the timeline for us? Because it looks like the earliest time Donald Trump might face these criminal charges would be kind of May next year.
Mm-hmm. But once again, that's if nothing happens. And so, for example, I think the toughest case for Trump from a conviction standpoint, as far as the facts, is the classified documents case. And when someone said they're going to bake a cake and put a file in it and send it to Trump, the problem is that file would be from the defense's archives and would be illegal for him to have. And so it's a strong case, but that also means you have to have a jury and legal officials in the courtroom who can handle these classified documents. So as John will tell you, that slows things way down. Then on the other cases, they're going to say, look, we're in line for this case. We've got to go. I'm prepping for the other trial. And so I think you're not going to see an actual courtroom trial until after the election.